Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda, and I'm so glad that you could join me today. Today, we're going to continue on with basically the breakdown of my journey as to why Christianity just doesn't work for me anymore. Last time, I talked to you about my journey, which led me to question if Christianity was right for me, my journey thus far. And today we're going to talk more about, I would probably say, the biggest point that caused me to decide to disconnect with Christianity. Today we're talking about Jesus and the Trinity. So if you're ready, let's hit the intro and we'll begin. So within Christianity, the concept of Jesus is the most important thing. They are called Christians based off of Christ's teachings. So believing in Jesus and following his teachings is a cornerstone of what it means to be a Christian. So certainly coming to have questions or doubts with my concept or my understanding of Jesus was one that I struggled with for a long time. It's not one that I just woke up one day and magically decided. It was something that happened throughout a course of time. And before I had a problem with Jesus, I struggled with another concept that's quite important in Christianity, and that's the Trinity. So in Christianity, there's this concept of a Trinity. It's frequently seen as a triangle. So it's God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the concept or the idea is that all three aspects are one in the same. And that was a struggle to me growing up, understandably. When I was teaching it to students, when I taught Sunday school, we would explain the Trinity as the three stages of water. So ice, a liquid form, and water vapor. We would explain it as the three parts of an apple: the seeds, the white part, and the skin. That all three of those still are an apple. If you show them just the seeds, well, what is this? It's an apple seed. Okay, if you show them just the white fleshy part, what is this? Oh, it's apple. It's part of the apple. Oh, this is the skin of the apple. That all three were essentially one. That I could understand and explain at a basic level, but when you got deeper into okay, so they're three in one, they all have the same gifts or abilities, but they're used in different ways. That got a little trickier in my understanding, because nobody, no thing, no anything can do everything and know everything that God does. Jesus could not do the things that Jesus did in the Bible as the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit didn't have a physical body. So that's where it got more dicey for me, and I had more questions. And I struggled with that. I struggled with that significantly. And so as I was working through my own difficulties, I came across some different resources that helped me understand it in a different way. One of the most important being watching the movie called The Shack. So in this movie, there's a guy who loses his daughter, and he's invited to this shack in the middle of nowhere, and he encounters God. And so God takes different forms, and they say he takes different forms because of how you need him to be at that moment so you can relate to him better. So when you need to relate to somebody more as a father figure, then you switch to viewing God as the Trinity as to more of like a father figure type. So like more of a God figure. If you were looking for somebody to be more relatable and help you understand how to do something in your everyday life, then you would switch and view it more as a Jesus figure, because he was, in the Christian view, he was a man and he was living on this earth. And so he did some human things. So he was more relatable in that way. There are other parts in the shack where God takes a feminine role because you need more of that nurturing and kindness aspect. There are aspects in the shack where all of a sudden God takes on different ethnicities, and God is taking on the Holy Spirit, and you see the beauty within nature and how the invisible power of God can change things, how you see things, how you interact with things. And so that movie was very transformative for me in understanding the Trinity in a different way. For a long time, I could relate to the shack and that understanding, and it I wouldn't say I made my peace with it, but it was sufficient for me. I got it. And different people relate to God in different ways, so I wasn't as concerned about things. And then I started to grow in my awareness during services how much of the service was focused on Jesus. And particularly this awareness came when I was in college, and I happened to go to a Catholic college, and I was taking a religion class, and they were talking about God and the Trinity and how, like, the balance of it all within the service. So it was interesting because I became very aware, and I remember causing quite the discussion when I brought up the fact that in the services that I was attending, we didn't really talk about God. Maybe once or twice a service, but a majority of the service, 98%, we were praying to Jesus, singing to Jesus, talking about Jesus, doing prayers in Jesus' name. We didn't talk about God. And if we did, it was in the concept of the Trinity. Now, there are those that say, well, if you're talking about Jesus, you're talking about God. If you're talking about God, you're talking about Jesus. Any one of the three in the Trinity, they view as it's all God. So it doesn't matter who you're talking about. When I became aware of how heavily the focus seemed to be on Jesus, it made me question things. And I started making little changes. So some prayers, I would switch from Jesus to God. In the songs, I would switch the words from Jesus to God or the Holy Spirit to God, because I felt like so much of the focus of the services wasn't on God. And isn't God the one who created everybody? Jesus isn't credited with creating people. The Holy Spirit isn't credited with creating people. It was God. And it's God that delivers the blessings to people. And it's God that helps them. And so the more I was aware of what was happening during services, and the more I felt unsettled. So the more I grew in my awareness of how the focus seemed to be quite skewed towards Jesus and leaving behind the importance of the creating Father and the one who brought our history and brought us and created all of this world for us to enjoy. I felt like I was being very disrespectful by ignoring him. And again, I know that there are people who will say, well, but you're not ignoring him because, again, God, the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, they're all one. So if you're praying to Jesus, you're praying to everybody. Okay, I hear your point, but at the same time, they're not the same. When you're eating an apple and you say, oh, that was a good apple, you're not talking about, ooh, I really liked those apple seeds. Are the apple seeds important to the apple? Yes. But that's not the part you're commenting on. So it felt disingenuous, and it became jarring and irritating to the point where once I noticed how frequently everything was focused around Jesus and how I started to personally switch different things. So I was not even focused 100% on God, but just to kind of level the playing field a little bit. Let's put Jesus and God at the same level. I grew more and more disdain for how much people were focused on Jesus. I felt like it was very disrespectful to God and that it was not right for me to be giving that honor, that praise for things that he did to somebody else. I remember as a child, we were cleaning up a house, and if I did a really good job cleaning, say, the living room, and my sister got credit for it, oh, was I ever ticked. And I'm just a human being, and that was just one thing. It doesn't really matter that much. But to put humanistic qualities into it, I couldn't imagine, and God is beyond all human emotions, but I couldn't imagine how disrespected, how hurt, how like a second thought God must have felt, like an afterthought. And I just didn't feel like that was right. So I tried to start evening that balance. And then as I was learning more and more, I had more questions. So I started digging into it. Okay, so in my journey, when I started having difficulty with the concept of the Trinity, when I started to have difficulty with the idea that Jesus did a lot of miracles, do I really think one person did all that? Do I really think that there was a woman who was impregnated by God to have his child? Do I really think that a father would give his child up for the rest of humanity? I had more doubts. I had more times where I see flaws. I don't think this is quite right. I think there's this and I think there's that. I read different books. One of the books I read was called Jesus Among Us. it talked about different miracles around the world and these people who had these miraculous things. As I'm reading them, as great as it is to hear these different viewpoints and how the people are seeing Jesus or God in the present and how they're making a difference, I couldn't help but also be drawn to the part of, okay, but there's also a human quality here. A pack of gum wasn't unending. It was people sharing the little bits they had to enjoy a simple pleasure. It was people stopping being selfish and sharing what they had for a greater good. But they needed somebody to start. It was somebody having the courage in the moment of a panic in a storm, just saying, calm down, take a look around, reassure you. I know in my life, when I'm stressed out, when I'm panicked, I kind of spiral. And my amazing boyfriend is there, and he's like, okay, you need to just kind of pause. You're fine. We've got this, whatever. And you just need somebody to kind of take the helm sometimes when you're losing control. And so as I'm reading these different books, I'm seeing what people are attributing to, oh, this was God, or oh, this was Jesus. And there's certainly aspects of God in our daily lives because God created the world around us and God created us to have free will. So I don't doubt that by any means. But I did start questioning, have people given Jesus too much credit? Are we sure that Jesus did all these miracles? From a medical standpoint, putting mud on somebody's eyes doesn't medically make them see again. Could it be some other reasoning? Maybe they had like a pink eye type condition where they had to have the gunk wiped away so they could see again. And maybe there was something in the mud and that's what healed them. From the medical side, if a person is dead 3 days, I don't know a medical way for them to be raised back to life. Were they dead? Maybe they were in a coma. Maybe they were really sick. There are just things that led to more questions and I had more doubts. So then I rerouted myself and okay, so I don't necessarily, I'm no longer on board with the Trinity. I don't believe that all three are at the same level. I think that God is the creator. I don't believe that Jesus creates, so he's not the same as God. The Holy Spirit doesn't do the same things as God. Jesus doesn't know the same things as God because Jesus even says, no one knows the plans that God has. No one. So not even Jesus. Okay, so they're not the same. So the Trinity was done in my head. I don't care, like, okay, if you think Jesus is a special person and the Holy Spirit. At that point, I didn't really care. Just know God is different and God is the one that we should be praying to, was in my head. So then the worship services continue. We still continue to sing about Jesus all the time. We talk about his birthday. We talk about his death. Like, again, 98% of the service is praying to, singing to, talking about Jesus. Okay. why? What makes Jesus so special? In one of my last times that I spoke with a pastor seeking questions, I said, okay, so if we talk and you say, well, Jesus is special because he's the Son of God. Okay. And in the next breath, you also say, well, we're all sons and daughters of God. Okay, so like Jesus is God's favorite child? It doesn't work in my head. It didn't work in my head. So I went back to the beginning and I'm like, okay, so from a Christian side, what is the goal of Jesus? And I've talked to different friends of mine. I have friends who are Lutheran, and I have friends who are Presbyterian, and I have friends who are Catholic, and I have friends who are non-denominational, and I have friends who are Baptist. So I have friends from a lot of different Christian denominations. And I would ask them, tell me what your understanding of Jesus is. Because I was struggling. I wanted to find answers. I wanted to understand, because when I would bring up questions to my pastors or my leaders or whatever, it basically would come down to, you don't need to worry about it. Stop thinking that hard. Or, well, if you just prayed about it, or if you had more faith, it would all make sense to you. Great information when you're struggling with something. So I went to these different individuals and I said, tell me about your understanding of Jesus. What's Jesus's purpose? Help me understand. And so they came down to, okay, well, Jesus was sent to save the world. Okay. Jesus was sent to bring people to God. Okay. And then Jesus was sent to bring a kingdom to earth for God to exist. Basically through understanding is what they've explained. Okay, so just those three. Compare that to any other denomination. Muhammad was sent to be a prophet. He was sent to teach people about Allah. And he was sent to spread the knowledge so that people could attain the Islamic version of heaven. It seems very similar to many other denominations, the Christian view of Jesus. So it doesn't seem special to me. And then I did some research and I discovered that that's not what the Old Testament says the Messiah's purpose is. The Messiah's purpose is not to die for the sins of the world. The Messiah's purpose is not to save all of humanity. The Messiah's purpose is not to establish a kingdom for God. No. The Messiah's purpose is not to do a bunch of miracles to show the power of God. What the Old Testament, which the Christian denominations and the Islamic faith practices base their religious practices around, is the Old Testament. It says that the Messiah will come from the line of David, which Jesus doesn't. That all will know God, the one true God, and that's all. One God. Didn't say Trinity, one God. That the third temple will be built. There's not a third temple. And that there would be world peace. There's not world peace. So when I discovered that, I had even more questions. So how do I know that Jesus was the Messiah? So let's back up just a moment. So the Old Testament states that the Messiah is going to come from the lineage or the house of David. Okay, so some Christians will spin that and say, well, if you do the research, then if you go through the mother, then this person is from the house of David. Okay, let's back up. You wouldn't do lineage through the mother, it would come through the father. So Mary's lineage doesn't matter. And Jesus' thing is that he is God's son. God doesn't have a lineage. He wouldn't have connection from him. He would have connection from God to David, but Jesus came straight from God. He kind of circumvented it. Doesn't work. And then the really interesting one I've heard people try to explain is how, well, no, it's okay because Jesus' lineage through Joseph, who is Jesus' earthly father, well, that kind of lines up because that's David's cousin, I believe it is. But that doesn't make sense either. That would be like, okay, you're going to trace your lineage through your adopted father. Nope, that doesn't make sense. So the whole lineage thing doesn't work. That's one thing that doesn't work. And then I started looking at the New Testaments. And did you know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 Gospels, were not written in that order? They were not written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John order. They were written in a different order, and they were put together purposely in that order at the Council of Nicaea, who is a whole different thing as to why I now have a lot of questions about Christianity. But anyways, the New Testaments, when you look at them in order of creation, I believe it goes Luke, John, Matthew, Mark, or something like that. I could be wrong, but it's not the right order. If you look up the chronological time as to when the Gospels are written, the stories of Jesus' birth change. In the first one, there are no shepherds. All of a sudden, in a subsequent one, oh, he's going to be the Messiah. They changed the narrative, it seems. Almost like they're trying to correct or enhance a story. And that was puzzling to me. Because why would they do that? And I understand when I was in Christianity, they explained it as, well, but there's the different writers because they have different points of view. And it was expressed to me that, well, all 4 Gospels, they were all there and it was like 4 different people that were at these events. Nope. The earliest of the Gospels was written 30 years after Jesus died. Jesus died in his 30s. It was a long time. So 30 years after, somebody is writing these stories. Whether they were told orally and recorded at that time, or, oh, I remember bits and pieces, or, oh, my grandma told me this, that I don't know. But it was written 30 years after the oldest one. Why they did not condense some of them, the Council of Nicaea picked and chose which books to have in the Bible. They picked the order that the books appear. They took verses out of the Bible. I don't know why they put the gospel in the order they did. But if you take any one of the four Gospels and read the nativity story or read the stories about Jesus, it misses chunks. Even at the time of Jesus' death, they're slightly different. In some, Jesus stays on the cross. In some, Jesus is taken down and he's put in the tomb and guarded by soldiers. In some, the soldiers are gone and the tomb is just open. Like it's different. And I can't imagine that is by happenstance. There are too many things that just don't make sense on that. And when I would bring up questions when I was in Christianity, that's when I would get the response of you're thinking too literally about this. Like the details don't matter. Don't worry about that. It's not for you to worry about. Just pray about it. It's fine. Skip over the details. You don't need to worry about it. It floored me when I was having a conversation with my amazing boyfriend, and he talked about the crucifixion story with me. And he's like, okay, so let me get this straight. You have a person who is crucified. Okay, you wrap him up, you put him in the tomb, you open the tomb 3 days later and decide you're going to put perfume on him. Tell me the purpose of that, is what he said. And I didn't have an answer. Because I had taught the story. And I kind of always skipped over the 3 days. That they took him down from the cross, they wrapped him in the cloth, they covered him with the oil, kind of like they do now with embalming people, and then they put them in the tomb. I skipped the part when I was teaching the kids about that there was 3 days in between. And then the medical side of me goes, I know what happens to a deceased body. And there's no reason to do the oil and spices on the body after they are deceased. There's no amount of perfume that's going to cover up that smell of decaying flesh. There is no amount of prayers that is going to keep the body intact. So that story blew my mind, quite honestly. And I couldn't make it make sense anymore. Then I learned a huge thing that really just continually caused avalanches in my understanding. So then, as I was having a discussion with my amazing boyfriend, as we frequently do about religion and other topics, we were talking about historical events at that time. And because my boyfriend's a big history buff and he knows a lot about history. And he was talking about the story of Jesus' birth and like why they were going to Bethlehem. And I said, oh, well, no, we're taught that Mary and Joseph were going to Bethlehem because there was a census ordered and Joseph was from the house of David. So all of the people from the house of David had to go back to Bethlehem in Judah because that's where they were going to be counted. And he's like, say that again. And so I said the whole thing again. And he's like, so you're saying that there was a time where there was a census demanded and everybody had to go back from their initial house? I said, yeah, that's what we're taught. He said, does that make sense to you? And I'm like, well, that's what we were taught. And then I thought about it more. And no, it doesn't make sense because Joseph is kind of from the house of David, but Jesus is not from Joseph. And he blew my mind with this concept of there is no historical record of a census being ordered by King Herod. None. And they would not do a census in specific places. They would not say, oh, you have to go back to this place in order to be counted. No. They count who's there, not where you're coming from. If you move from California to Texas and it's census time, you don't go back to California because that's where you were born to be counted. No, they count you in Texas because that's where you live. So that, when he had that discussion, that made sense. But it blew my mind that there was no historical record. Now, there are historical records of other censuses being taken. There's historical references about these different events that were happening, but there's nothing about this census that caused Joseph to bring Mary and have Jesus born in a stable. And then the more I learned about it, the more I questioned, like, okay, but if you take away different aspects, the concept of Jesus doesn't seem quite as intriguing. Maybe Mary wasn't a virgin. Maybe she was a concubine. Maybe a man took advantage of her. Maybe a lot of different things. Maybe Jesus wasn't born in a stable. Maybe he really didn't, in some versions of the story, talk in Mary's womb, like audibly talk. Seems kind of weird. Maybe Jesus didn't do the miracles that he said, or to the extent that he said. There's just a lot of doubts, and the more you take different things and find cracks in it, the more questions it led to. And it led to more thinking critically about the situation. And okay, well, if this isn't lining up, well, then how does this make sense? And to make it all make sense, or to make Jesus be this big important person, the dots have to at least line up to make the outline of a picture. And the more I kept taking dots away because it didn't fit, the harder it was for me to say, yeah, I think Jesus is the Messiah. Now, as I was doing more research, and I found out that there were multiple people throughout time that were deemed the Messiah. And many of them had ties to paganism. That floored me. I thought Jesus was the only one. Nope. I'm going to tell you about two. So the first one was a man named Horus. This happened in Egypt. Again, it was part of the Egyptian gods that they said he was the Messiah as the Egyptian gods. He was born in a cave. He was born by a virgin. He too walked on water. He raised his dead father, and he was hung on a cross when he died. Sound like anybody else you know? Now, the number 2 one that we're going to talk about is known as Krishna. This is one of from the pagan community. And a lot of the concepts, idiosyncrasies of Jesus do tie a lot to pagan traditions. And this was quite purposeful, done at the Council of Nicaea again. Again, we'll talk about that at a later time because that's a whole issue in and of itself. But Krishna was born during a slaughter order, similar to Moses. And so there was that little tie. There was a slaughter order in place by King Kansa, and Krishna was born. He performed miracles. He also hung on a cross, and it is said that when he was passing, that the sun was blocked out, which some believe happened when Jesus died. And this happens over and over again. There's about 15 to 20 different stories of this through history. That blew my mind. I thought Jesus was the only one. And so when I found out that there were all these other stories and they had miracles. Oh, they were born from a virgin. Oh, they died on a cross. Oh, this happened. And oh, this happened. And oh, this happened. So tell me why Jesus is special again? Because all the things that were supposedly making him special, other people did. And the things that the Old Testament says the Messiah is supposed to do, he didn't do. Now, there are some who will say, oh, well, Jesus is going to do that when he comes back. You mean the third time? Because he did come back once already. He died, he was buried, crucified, buried, and he rose again. Still no temple, still no world peace. There are still different gods. Not everybody knows God. The goal, the purpose of the Messiah hasn't been completed. So he's going to do that on the third go around. It just led to more questions. And the more holes you poke in a sandcastle, the less sturdy it is. I couldn't, after I was learning all these different things, I couldn't make Jesus make sense anymore. That paired with going to services and it's 98% focused on him. I loved going to services with my mom, for example. Love her dearly, love singing with her, love learning with her. But it drove me nuts how much they were focused on Jesus, and the concept of Jesus just didn't work for me. It felt so sacrilegious that we were spending all this time focusing on this person who didn't do what they said he was going to do, and that other people had done different things, and it made me upset, quite honestly. It made me upset and it made me frustrated. And the verse that really, really irritates me is John 14:6. And summarizing it, it says, "No one can get to the Father but through me." So nobody can know God except if they know you, Jesus. If you were skeptical, as I am, and somebody says, well, you can't know that unless you learn it from this person, or you can't know that unless this person translates it for you. Why can't I just learn how to translate it? If you're putting roadblocks in between, it feels like you're trying to hide something. It feels like you're trying to cover something up. And so I had significant struggles with Jesus. Didn't agree with the concept of the Trinity, but I still love God. So what was I going to do? I read more. I asked more questions. I studied more. I know that in Christianity, they believe that God is eternal, is beyond all time and space, that God is all-knowing, that God is perfect, and that God is holy. That God is beyond all description. That all-knowing portion, that's the one that in particular made me separate God from Jesus. No one can, and I don't think anybody should, know all that God knows. There are things that I know that my amazing boyfriend doesn't know. There are things that my mom knows that my dad doesn't know. There are things that people at my work know that people at former places that I've worked at or at the grocery store, they don't know. Nobody knows everything that the other person knows. And God is even beyond all of that. So to try to put not one person, but two identities into a trinity and say, okay, God's all-knowing, Jesus is all-knowing, the Holy Spirit is all-knowing. I can't get on board with that. There are too many flaws in my understanding of Jesus for that to make sense to me anymore. And as I learned more, I had to change. You can't keep on going through life knowing that, say, smoking is bad for you. You can't keep on going and living your life smoking 2 packs a day at a cigarette manufacturer doing that job and not have some kind of qualms about that. I couldn't. There are things that are important, in my personal opinion. And God and my relationship with God is one of those things. And I know that God is beyond all human feelings. But I also believe that God deserves the respect for the amazing creations that He has made. And it is disrespectful to a high degree to try to put other people at the same level as Him, to praise somebody else for things that He did. I put it, another conversation that I had with my amazing boyfriend is when he was talking about the relationship that one has with God or with Jesus or whatever, and he compared it to like a relationship with your spouse. You can have relationships with siblings, you can have friends, you can whatever, but if you're married, the way you treat your spouse, you hold them at a higher degree. You hold them in a safer space. You revere them more than your sister, your friend, the person at the grocery store. And that resonated with me. to think about my relationship with God as a relationship and having that connection with him, and that he cares about me and he appreciates, doesn't need me to say thank you, but why wouldn't somebody appreciate being told thank you? It was just an amazing way to look at that relationship. And that forever changed how I viewed my relationship with God. And so since I made that change in how I view my relationship with God, for me, there's never been a pull to have a relationship with Jesus. Because there's not a need there. There's not a desire. There's only heartache, and there are questions that are taught and unlearned and confusing and misinformed, and it's a messy situation that I don't need in my life. I have God, and that's all I need. Am I always learning more about God? Absolutely. Will I ever stop learning about God? No. But that's how I discovered that Jesus isn't for me. It just isn't for me. So, if you enjoyed today's presentation, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, because next time, we're going to talk about the Bible and some of the struggles that I've had with the Bible and how they treat people in the Bible, and contradictions that I've discovered in the Bible, and just things that didn't make sense the more I researched. And you're not going to want to miss that. So again, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy, and I appreciate you joining me, because the more we know, the more we grow. Until next time, bye-bye.